Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon, lovely people. This is Marie signing on here on Unsilence Grief after a few technical issues. I'm so glad that we are here. And I have the wonderful AJ Coleman next to me. You and I connected, I believe, via Podmatch. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Yep. Yeah. I have mentioned this wonderful platform so many times because it really connects people on
Lovely
certain
people, this
topics
is
that
Marie.
really needs to be talked about. And one of our topics that we have in common is widowhood and soul parenting. So without further ado, AJ, would you do us the honor to introduce yourself, to our audience, please? Thank you.
Yes. Hi, everyone. I'm AJ Coleman, author of Keep Those Feet Moving. I've spent many years in grief, maintaining the loss of my wife, raising a child on my own, but also going through various setbacks, whether it's a hearing impairment to a loss of a job, loss of faith. And I decided to write a book to help others who may be going through their own grief process to help them cope and eventually move on and live more of a fruitful type life.
Yeah. That's incredible. Like when I heard your story, I'm like, I can't wait to have this conversation with you here. Um, I think the easiest might probably be to take our audience with us and share a little bit about your story because your daughter was very young when your wife passed away. Can you share a little bit about your story as much and as deep as you want to go? I really leave this up to you.
Sure, sure. So, our daughter was 2 months old when my wife was diagnosed with terminal brain cancer. And at the time, we had just started coming out and trying to get into a pattern of parenthood, right? You know, when you leave a hospital, there's no manual that tells you how to take care of your child, and
Yeah.
they don't come out talking. And I learned very quickly to be both a mom and dad as well as a caretaker.
Mm,
And the first year, we were able to sort of navigate through uncharted waters, right? Dealing with some of the healthcare issues of my wife, watching our daughter grow up and trying to spend as much time. But when my wife did pass, my daughter was only about 14 months old.
right.
And it was, a bitter moment for a lot of us because the realization of being not only a single dad, but I also was grieving the loss of my spouse and ultimately the love of my life.
Mm. So your wife basically had 1 year from diagnosis till she passed, right?
Yes, the doctors came out, and it's so surreal. It's like almost like a time clock when they say, okay, life expectancy 1 to 2 years. And at that moment, when I heard that, it was quite emotional.
Yeah.
I cried for a few minutes and then I said, you know what? We're going to beat this. I don't care what the doctors say. I don't care what medical science. We are going to find a way.
Yeah.
And we have fought every day that we had together to beat it. And I really did believe we were going to. I know it might have sounded delusional, but when I
No.
learned it was part of the grieving process that I was going through
Hmm.
before the grief even settled in.
Yeah.
And ultimately, what enabled me to be able to speak about it freely is the closure and giving my wife that storybook ending at the very last final days of her life that she could take with her, that I can take with her. I couldn't have written a better ending, only I didn't know it was the end at that time.
Yeah. Yeah. I can't even begin to imagine. And I have to ask you this, AJ, when you receive such news and you are in your heart, I am absolutely convinced that you think we can beat this, love conquers all, and you go into this really hopeful state and you fight. You really fight for it and you have her back and you become mom and dad at the same time and the caretaker. And there is so many roles and so many waves of emotions that you're going through. Did you actually find the space or create the space where you could enjoy being young parents as well?
It happens so fast. I mean, when a child is born, usually everybody comes and visits with all the excitement and
Yeah.
grandparents, family members.
Mm.
And it was no different for us as well. So the first 2 months, we must have had all sorts of different visitors. We had lived away from some of our family members, and we only had maybe 2 or 3 nights to ourselves without any visitors. So it was hard for me to look back and compare what life was like versus what it was. I didn't really have that opportunity where it was just the three of us.
Yeah,
And it was a little bit of a different where we can't just go back and say, well, I remember what life was like way back when, before she got sick, how we were as a
yeah,
family. It was almost that we got thrown into this pretty quickly. And
yeah,
the maturity level, I was only 32 years old at the time of the diagnosis, 33 when she passed. And I mean, what did I know? I
yeah.
mean, you're starting out in life, you're starting to understand what it takes to be an adult. And,
Mm. Let
but
alone a dad, let
I,
alone
I, uh,
one.
I just had this mentality that no matter the odds, no matter what we were going to do, we were going to beat this. And it was important for me because it helped me get through. My
Yeah.
days were all blended together. When I look back at times, it's sort of like a dark hole.
Mm.
And if you ask me like what happened on such and such day, I probably can't remember, but I can give you an idea that I was probably working at the hospital, at the rehabilitation center, taking care of my daughter, and then up at like 3, 4 in the morning the next day and doing it all over again 7 days a week.
Yeah. Well, I can relate to that, what you're saying, because I feel when you are going through a period of really intense grief and yet you're still, uh, you're still there to do the day-to-day parenting, etc. I feel when I look back into the time where Rob passed away, there were a lot of times where I know I was functioning. I know I was highly functioning. I was even um, sometimes on the outside, sometimes also on the inside, happy at times, and that was my lighthouse in the darkest hour to really focus on happiness. That's my story. But what I want to get to is that I feel there are a lot of times where people go like, "Oh, did you do or do you remember or when that?" And I'm like, "No, I don't." It's like blocked out. And I also understand from the um, neuroscience background, that this is just a coping mechanism of the brain to shut down certain areas or certain memories because there was absolutely too much pain or too much intensity involved. And I kind of like that protection mechanism that my brain is protected and protects my heart, therefore. But other times, I find it really frustrating that I can't remember certain things. How do you feel about this?
Honestly, there are times I just don't want to remember.
Mm.
And I think the hard times where my anxiety went through the roof was more in the
Mm.
waiting process, waiting for the results of a MRI, waiting for the results of what the doctor has come back on the prognosis of the disease and the progression. And
Yeah,
those things, and it's really the way our brains work, we tend to remember more of the negative, more of the stress than we do all the wonderful memories. I mean, we do have memories, but they seem to be overshadowed. At least for me, it
yeah,
has been. And that time in my life, just putting on so many different hats, channeling through different emotions throughout the day, and just trying to find ways to survive. And but I look back and I just don't think I knew what I was really going through
mm,
until afterwards. And that's when you take a step back and you look at that grief process and
yeah,
you, you sort of wish that you can remember certain more happy moments in that time period.
yeah. And do you remember, because, so, Matt, sorry, Why did I want to call your daughter Maddie? What is her name?
Zoe.
I don't know where Maddie just came from. I just, when I was about to say that loud, I'm like, no, that's not her name. I'm so sorry.
Huh,
Um, so Zoe was 14 months old when your wife passed away.
yes.
Do you, did you have a support network? Did you have people come help you out with baby? Did people come to support you? Can you share a little bit about those? Because that to me is the most intense moment, when it's that finality, and now it's the two of you. How did you even take those first steps? Who held you?
It was a challenging time for us. There are certain things I certainly can disclose. At the time of the diagnosis, we were living in one part of the United States, and with my family in that area, I had worked for my father. And at the time of the diagnosis, my wife wanted to go back home to Chicago,
Mm,
Illinois, and be with her family. So I had to leave my entire family that reside in a completely different part of the country behind. And there was some emotions with that, with us leaving, where my family was used to seeing us. They were used to seeing my daughter for the time being,
yeah.
and now we're moving away. The support we got was a lot on my wife's parents, obviously. A
Mm,
lot of what they were going through with their own emotion and trying to balance between being a parent, taking care of their sick daughter,
yeah.
working with me on some of the decisions. And I had a group of friends that were very supportive at the time to help me just kind of channel through. It was tough for them to see because we were all so young.
Yeah.
And I would say my biggest supporters were my aunt and uncle, who I'm very close with still this day, where
Hmm.
they help guide me, provide really significant resources to consider.
Yeah.
And they were very influential in helping me, even after my wife had passed, is just helping me through in that area. But we were blessed to surround ourselves with many great people for my daughter. And
Mm,
a lot of her memories really are just stories, photos, maybe videos that we have. And that all helps. But as you know, time does take away some of those elements of support because people can't continue to hang out with us and be with us without seeing our significant other with us. And it's very hard for them on their grief. So as time went by, we did lose connections with a lot of people that
mm.
were with me during that journey.
Yeah, I can relate as well. Do you sometimes feel that, at the beginning when somebody passes away, there is this wave of support? People are literally pouring in left, right, center and knocking on your door and bringing food and sitting with you and doing so many things. And I, for myself, was very overwhelmed by that. I found it actually too much, to be honest. And then when I sort of processed through it, and then when I got to a stage where I'm like, and now it will be nice, that's when the support actually started dropping off, mostly, not all of it. There were still a lot of really beautiful people in our lives who supported us, but I found that a little bit out of balance. Can you relate to that?
The first couple days after, it was a lot of people coming by. Now I
Mm,
had my own place, and everybody would come to my in-laws' place, my wife's parents' house, where we would
yeah,
meet up. They had a much larger house and can handle all the visitations,
mm,
and
that helps.
um, it did help. Sometimes what I found is a lot of their support was for them as well.
Yeah,
And after about a week uh, going through this, I kind of realized a lot of it was sort of on my own. I did have a kind of a nanny to help me with
mm,
my daughter because there was no way that I could go to work,
yeah,
do all these things, be there, and I mean I had to make a living as well.
Yeah.
And I remember taking some time off, but I would go to the cemetery every single day and
Mm.
just sit there with my wife and just kind of talk to her, cry, and ask her sort of, yeah, the support is great. It can be overwhelming, but as the days go by, the weeks go by, it becomes less and less. The other thing that I found, being 33 years old, a lot of people expected me to fail
Mm.
and just become overwhelmed with such grief that I couldn't function, that I would go into a depressive state. And I certainly understand why people would think that in general, right? Because we've seen the movies, we've seen how life plays out at a certain time, but that wasn't who I am. And there was a part of me that felt that I had to prove to others that I've got this. Let me be. Let me handle this the best way that I know, which is what I've been doing my entire life, is finding ways to overcome different areas of grief, whether it's a hearing loss, a job loss, companionship loss. I always found those ways. And sometimes you get too much support, it
Mm.
becomes noise.
Yeah. And how do you feel that what you had gone through earlier in life has, in a weird way, prepared you for what you were dealing with afterwards?
I did not know what my
Mm.
significance was. I always believed that we are born into this world for a particular purpose. Some people may agree, may not agree, but
I do.
I believe.
Mm.
And sometimes we don't understand what that purpose is. And when I was born, unknowing at the time, I was born with a significant hearing impairment.
Mm.
And the grief that I went through as a young child, and even growing up into my teenage years and young adult, actually helped shape me for this experience that I would later come to as a widower and a single parent. That all those challenges, every time that I would fight through it, find different ways to get those doors unlocked, helped me remain calm, remain steady, and ultimately sort of plan next steps, even though planning was overused term at that time. But it helped me stay grounded and become more resilient to the next challenge that I would face.
Yeah. And do you remember how old Zoe was when you felt like, you know what, I feel like I'm getting there. I can do this. I've got this under control. Don't ever think you have parenting under control. I think it's the wrongest word for parenting ever, but that you're sort of dealing with it in a healthy and good way. How old was Zoe when you first had that? I'm getting there.
Well, Zoe and I have always been very close, and I have always believed in being transparent with her,
Mm.
even when she was a little girl, and just telling her how things were. I didn't sugarcoat. So I think she learned at an early age. I leaned on her as much as she leaned on me for survival, and we were in this every day. And there were moments where I had to find the right words to talk about certain things. She realized that her home was a little different than some of her friends. Their moms would go out and go get their nails done and do some of the things in the salon. And here comes dad that doesn't have a clue of what we do in the nail salon, but I'm trying to support her
Yeah.
and realizing that at times I'm doing the best I can.
Mm.
And she's 17 now. We're extremely close. There are times where she will tell me things that I just don't want to hear. But
And
I,
at the
I,
same time, aren't you glad that she does?
it is.
Yeah.
But I always think about this: is how many other parents would love to be in the situation that I'm in,
Mm.
and every night I'd still tuck her into bed, turn the covers up, turn off the lights, we do our prayers, we do our
Mm.
quick routine, Because one day she's not going to want that, and I'm going to miss that. But for the time being, it's a wonderful memory that we have created together. But she learned at an early age to understand that her life was a little bit different. But then again, she had really nothing to compare it to, where she had both mom and dad raising
Mm.
her, and then all of a
Yeah.
sudden something happens and now you only have one parent. This is all she's known.
Yeah.
But I will tell you, she uses that card sometimes against me, especially when it comes to shopping.
Mm.
And we've had some interesting dilemmas. I had to teach her in an early age what a credit card was and how credit cards operate, and she just couldn't understand that you pay and you got to pay the credit card company back.
Yeah.
So we go shopping, and I'm like, that's a really expensive. But
Mm.
daddy, the credit card company can afford it. So let's pay
Yeah.
for that there. But you know, it's one of those things where we look back at each other and we laugh at some of these
Mm.
stories. And
I can
I
only
think she's,
imagine.
yeah,
AJ, at what stage did you think, I'm going to write a book about this? Was that a trigger? Was that a sneaking in moment? Tell me a little bit about that. How did that come about and when did you write it? Share a little bit about it. So, yeah.
having gone through grief my entire life with different avenues, I've learned to offer different wisdom, different philosophical views on how I look at things.
Mm.
And people around me, after listening to me speak, why don't you write a book? And I'm thinking, no, I don't want my life story out there. I don't
Yeah.
think it's appropriate. And then as time went on, I started launch my first blog in 2013 just to see about what it would feel like about just opening up a little bit. I have lived a very sheltered life,
Mm.
and I ended up latching onto a business partner of mine that we used to work together, and he challenged me to write the book. And at one point, I ran out of options, I think, of saying no. So um, we, in the end of 2021, we went shopping around and we were looking for a publishing type company that we found it with book launchers.
Mm.
And I signed the paperwork and realized it's time to write a book. And I wrote um, I wrote the whole book really in 8 weeks.
Mm.
Each week, different chapter of my life, a different phase of grief.
Yeah.
And at the time, I thought it was really more so for my daughter to help
Mm.
her understand what we went through, moments that I shared during the last minutes of her mother's life. What were my thoughts?
Mm.
And writing the book actually became very therapeutic for me
Good.
because I started sharing a little bit more about who I was and
Mm.
some of the struggles I have, and that I never talked about my hearing impairment my
Mm.
entire life at all. And the book came out in 2022. In the first couple days, I was in like numb because I was like, what did I just
Yeah.
do?
Yeah.
But I realized is the value of being able to help others go through their grief, that they're not alone,
Mm.
and provide support and maybe some new wisdom and philosophical views that maybe they haven't thought about it as they go through it. One of the principles I always like to talk about is to celebrate the life, not mourn the loss.
Where's my highlighter? I love this so much. This is absolute my philosophy, you know.
It, it,
Yeah,
it's very
beautiful.
helpful when it
Can you
comes to
please share the
closure.
title of?
It is called Keep Those Feet Moving, just
Yeah.
straight there. And I got the title um, just just going out and about, struggling to find a title that resonates well. But when it comes to grief, the more action that you create, the more movement you have, you feel like you're going places. But when you come to a standstill and you just
Yeah.
don't know what to do, I think that's where that anxiety and that grief starts flustering up again. And I've always said, just keep those feet moving. As long as you're moving around, you always have some sort of option and movement.
Mm. Yeah. I think movement is really, really good because especially when it comes to grief, staying stuck in grief is really, really uncomfortable. And um, I don't know what your belief around that is. A lot of people carry that rather heavy belief that grief will stay with you forever. I don't believe that. My belief is that I treat grief like a visitor. You know, every now and then she still knocks on our door, and that's okay. Last night she knocked quite loudly, and I allowed her in, and we sat with her, one of my sons, Grief, and I, and we had a little cry. We had a very deep talk, and then I bid her farewell. And Joy, on the other hand, lives with us permanently. She's a permanent resident. She's allowed to stay. That's my philosophy. This is how I handle grief. I don't think that grief will stay with you forever. Yes, what happened certainly defines us. Everything that happens in our lives defines us, no matter what that is. So the fact that Rob passed away, the fact that your wife passed away, that is something that we can't make undone. But we can certainly choose what defines us and who we want to become, and who we choose to become throughout the story shines so brightly through you. So I really love hearing your story because what you and Zoe have is such a beautiful relationship. A lot of parents or dads would probably wish to have such a close relationship with their daughter. Not everybody has that. And I feel there's always, I like to call them the hidden gifts in adversity. The things that we realize I would have not gone through this, or I would not have this if I hadn't gone through the adversity. Be that, you know, the hearing impairment, be that the loss of your wife, be that the loss of my husband, my dad, you know, there are so many things that happen in life. And I feel you can either stay stuck in grief or stuck in, I didn't choose this. I think our empowerment, our choices lie in how we actually respond to it. And you certainly are such a shining example of that. So,
Thank you.
AJ, if you could give our listeners one thing that you like, if you take anything away from this podcast, I would like you to remember this or do this. I'm going to put you on a spot right here.
One of my favorite topics I like to talk about is the why and where principle. Some people might say why and how, but when it comes to grief, a lot of times we talk about why did this happen? Why me? Why this person? And the more questions you start leading with why, that's your grief talking.
Yeah.
The where aspect is more about where do you go from here? Where am I going? Where can I get help?
Mm.
Where can I get
Mm.
resources? And that
Yeah.
where is starting that first step forward in the healing process, accepting that there's closure around you. Not that you're going to forget and move on and all
Yeah.
that, but as you're recognizing that your life has a lot more to give and that you have that opportunity to create a legacy for your loved one. And by moving forward, that's that where. That's the key component in any grief. So next time anybody is in grief, whether it's a loss of a job, companionship, loved one, or even just loss of time, I mean, think about it, right? If you start questioning why, that should be your first aha moment that you're in that grief process.
Mm.
Flip it and think about where. Where do I want to go?
I love that.
Where, yeah, and that's helped me tremendously get some closure around that.
Yeah. I want to ask you one more question before we finish off here today. When people look at the book, Keep Those Feet Moving, who would you say this book is for? Is it more like an autobiography, or do you have tools in there how people can deal with it? Who's this book for? What can they expect?
It's really written for anybody going through any sort of grief. It doesn't necessarily have to be an individual that's lost of a loved one. I have tools in there of self-reflection for people who've gone through maybe a particular job loss and helping guide them through that process, giving them tips on how to navigate through that loss. In addition, how as a single parent and you have a loss of a companionship, not necessarily always means a loss of a loved one, but unfortunately a separation, a divorce. There are ideas, and the way this book is written, that anybody having any sort of grief can just come in, pick up a chapter, pick up the book. It's easy writing, it's easy reading,
I love that.
and it's designed to challenge you, but to put you on the pathways of your journey to learn how to cope with grief and overcome.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing this part of your life with us, for sharing your story with us, for sharing about Zoe. That is really, really
Thank you
beautiful.
for having me.
Yeah, for everyone listening to this, I'm certain there are a lot of people touched by what they hear. And I make sure that we share the link to your book in the show notes. So please come back to the show notes as soon as that interview finishes. I'm going back in and uploading all the links, how you can connect with AJ, how you can buy his book. And please do so. Support a single dad here, and I am absolutely certain you will get something out of this. So maybe you can buy it as a present for somebody. That would be a beautiful idea. AJ, thank you for your time. I really, really enjoyed these conversations, and thank you for your openness and vulnerability.
Thank you for having me. It's been a
And
pleasure.
yeah, is there any last question? Thank you for your patience with me with our internet outage. That really stressed me out at the beginning.
No,
I'm
no,
glad we could do this.
nah,
Everybody for thank you so much for listening. Thank you for being here.
yeah.
And if you enjoyed those conversations, please subscribe to our YouTube. AJ and Marie signing off. Thank you. Bye for now. Oh, I always need my
Yes.
glasses to find the sign.